And I am tired of having to prove myself. I am tired of having to defend my family. I am tired of being overworked, underpaid.
Egypt Sherrod is way more than just a reality star. She went from being a teenage radio host to a respected real estate broker and designer through sheer grit and never-ending hard work. Today, she is known as one of HGTV's most beloved faces.
Ultimately, I was flipping a house. That's what I used to do while I was on the radio as well before I became a real estate broker. And I got into it with my contractors because that's what we do, y'all, right? We get into it with the contractors.
After having built a media empire thanks to her show Married to Real Estate. But little do people know that all this success came with a price that the cameras never really capture. So, what really happened to Egypt Sherrod? And how did her biggest breakthrough turn into a fight that completely exhausted her? Let's find out. The woman behind the star. Before Egypt Sherrod ever stepped onto an HGTV set or walked through a half-demolished kitchen with blueprints in her hands, her life was already being shaped by something far more powerful than television. She was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and while many viewers assume she grew up with the kind of stability that produces polished professionals, her early years were anything but glamorous. Egypt was the oldest of 4 siblings, and growing up, life didn't revolve around designer furniture or dream homes. It revolved around making do with what was available. And sometimes, what was available wasn't much. One of the most striking details Egypt has shared about her childhood is that she didn't even have a real bedroom. For a period of her life, she lived with her grandparents, and the home was so small and crowded that the only space they could give her was a cramped closet. And this is not an exaggeration. Egypt later described it herself, and according to her, it was a space so tight that if she stretched out her arms, she could touch both walls. The only thing that fit inside was her bed. That was it. No room for toys or even to breathe and play the way children are supposed to. But what makes Egypt's story so compelling isn't the fact that she lived in a closet. It's what she did with that reality. Because for Egypt, that closet didn't become a symbol of limitation. It became the birthplace of imagination. In that cramped space, she started dreaming of something bigger. Not just a bigger closet or a bigger house, but a bigger life. She began picturing open rooms filled with light, warmth, and peace, the exact kind of spaces she would one day build for other people. It's almost ironic. The woman who would become famous for transforming homes started out in a home that barely had space for her. And while the closet might sound like a painful memory, Egypt has spoken about it in a way that surprises people. She doesn't carry it like shame. She carries it like proof that she has always known how to survive in tight spaces and still think beyond them. That childhood environment shaped her in ways she didn't fully understand at the time. When you grow up in a house where space is limited, privacy is limited, and stability feels fragile, you learn something early. You either shrink yourself or you expand your mind. Despite the cramped space, she had the presence of grandparents who worked hard, loved hard, and gave what they could. Their home might have been small, but it was still filled with lessons that stuck with her forever. Egypt has often described those years as foundational. She watched her grandparents stretch resources, protect their family, and keep pushing even when life wasn't fair. She learned resilience by watching it happen in real time. And without realizing it, she also developed an emotional connection to the idea of home itself, which is what eventually led her to realize her passion for real estate and home design. Egypt's early career. Most people don't realize Egypt Sherrod didn't start out in real estate at all. Long before HGTV, she was already building her name in radio, and she did it fast. She entered broadcasting young, hungry, and unusually confident for someone barely out of high school. At just 18 years old, she landed a job at a jazz station, learning the industry from the ground up. But Egypt wasn't just another voice reading scripts. She had presence, the kind of energy that sounded natural, sharp, and effortless, like she belonged behind a microphone. That became her edge almost immediately. By 19, Egypt had already accomplished something most people don't achieve until much later. She became a radio station music director, making her the youngest in the entire country to hold that role. And that wasn't some honorary title. A music director is responsible for shaping the station's identity, making decisions under pressure, and proving you can handle authority when everyone is waiting for you to fail. Egypt didn't just handle it, she thrived. Over time, her career kept rising until she became a major personality on WBLS 107.5 in New York City, one of the toughest and most competitive radio markets in America. At that point, she wasn't just working in radio. She was a recognizable name, a trusted voice, and someone with influence. That success opened doors to a whole different world. Celebrity interviews, red carpets, and high-level connections. Egypt interviewed major figures like Oprah Winfrey, Prince, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Tyler Perry. But those moments weren't just glamorous highlights. They trained her in something far more valuable: how to speak to powerful people, control conversations, and build trust quickly. And that skill would later become her secret weapon in real estate. Because whether you're interviewing Oprah or negotiating a major home deal, the key is the same. Make people feel comfortable, understood, and confident in your leadership. But even as her radio career exploded, Egypt started feeling boxed in. She didn't want her legacy to be tied to gossip and entertainment forever. She wanted something more stable, something lasting. That's when real estate became more than just an interest. It became a plan. When Egypt bought her first home at around 23 or 24 years old, the moment hit her emotionally. She later described opening the door, crying, and even kissing the hardwood floor. It wasn't for drama. It was because owning property meant security. It meant she finally had something real that couldn't be taken away. But the excitement quickly came with a harsh realization. She noticed how much money was being lost to agent fees and commissions. She respected the business, but she couldn't ignore the numbers. So in 2002, she got her real estate license. Egypt didn't want to depend on someone else to negotiate her future. She wanted control over the contracts, the deals, and the strategy. And with her media background, she already had the skills to succeed. Radio had taught her how to read people, listen for what wasn't being said, and build relationships fast. Over time, she expanded beyond buying and selling, leaning into design, renovation, and staging. She didn't just want to close deals. She wanted to transform spaces. Eventually, that drive became her foundation: Indigo Road Realty, Indigo Road Design Group, and later Indigo Road Home Furnishings. And unlike many TV personalities, Egypt didn't build a business because of fame. She built the business first. The fame came later. That's what viewers often miss. HGTV didn't create Egypt Sherrod's credibility. It simply put a camera in front of the work she was already doing. Egypt Sherrod never entered TV chasing fame. Radio had already made her a recognizable name, and television wasn't even on her radar until one unexpected phone call changed everything. While still working in radio, a casting director asked if she'd consider hosting a real estate show. Egypt agreed to audition, and it was clear instantly that she stood out. HGTV had plenty of hosts with charm, but not many with real industry knowledge and natural on-camera confidence. Egypt had both. That's how she landed Property Virgins and quickly earned viewer trust. But with visibility came pressure, expectations, and scrutiny, right as her personal life was shifting too. The love story behind the business. If Property Virgins introduced Egypt Sherrod to a national audience, Mike Jackson became the person who helped turn her success into something much bigger. But their relationship didn't start as most people assume. They first met back when Egypt was rising in radio, and Mike was building his name as a DJ. The attraction was there, but Egypt kept her distance, knowing how messy relationships in that world could get. Years later, they reconnected in a completely different setting. Egypt was flipping one of her investment properties when Mike showed up as the contractor hired after she fired the previous crew. This time, she didn't just see a DJ. She saw a businessman, a builder, and someone consistent under pressure. That shifted everything. They fell for each other during that renovation, which is fitting. because their entire relationship has always been rooted in teamwork. Still, Egypt admitted she initially pushed him away due to past relationship trauma. She tested him, questioned his intentions, and pulled back. But Mike didn't walk away. He called her out, forcing her to face what she was carrying. Over time, Egypt did the work, including therapy, and their relationship grew into more than romance. But it wasn't without its fair share of hardships. The struggle behind the scenes. In 2010, Egypt Sherrod and Mike Jackson got married, and not long after, they began building the family viewers would later fall in love with. But behind the warm on-screen chemistry was a reality far more complicated. After the birth of their daughter, Kendall, in 2012, Egypt experienced postpartum depression. At first, she didn't fully recognize what was happening, but it hit her self-esteem hard and quietly affected her marriage. She admitted she struggled with intimacy and felt disconnected from herself, leaving Mike confused and frustrated because he didn't understand the sudden emotional shift. Eventually, Egypt sought help, opened up about her experience, and slowly worked her way back to stability, but it left a lasting impact. And that wasn't the only storm they faced. For years, Egypt and Mike wanted to expand their family, but the journey was painful and uncertain. Egypt battled fibroids and endometriosis for 5 years, living with the fear that she might never have another child. At one point, she even considered adoption, but Mike wasn't fully on board, creating tension as they tried to navigate different expectations. Then, unexpectedly, Egypt became pregnant again. In 2019, she gave birth to Harper, but shortly after her C-section, she suffered a frightening health scare when fluid built up in her lungs, leaving her struggling to breathe. She described it as feeling like she was drowning, a terrifying reminder that success means nothing when your health is on the line. Not long after, another crisis hit. Harper began having trouble breathing at night, and for months, Egypt and Mike took turns sleeping in chairs while holding her upright just so she could get air. Doctors eventually discovered her enlarged adenoids were blocking her airway, and Harper needed surgery. Egypt would later praise her daughter's bravery through it all. But of course, that still doesn't erase the tough time the family went through back then. A time that really tested them. The turning point. Married to Real Estate wasn't something HGTV handed to Egypt Sherrod and Mike Jackson as a lucky break. It was something they built from scratch during the pandemic, while most people were simply trying to survive the uncertainty. Egypt and Mike sat down and made a decision. If they wanted a show that truly reflected their lives, they'd have to create it themselves. So they pitched the concept directly, not as a manufactured TV storyline, but as a real look into their marriage, their family, and their Atlanta-based renovation business. When the show premiered in 2022, audiences immediately connected with it for one reason. It felt real. Egypt wasn't acting like a designer. She really was one. And Mike was the guy actually making the plans come to life. Their dynamic wasn't built on drama, but on teamwork, humor, and the kind of chemistry that doesn't need scripted tension to stay interesting. And in a network full of renovation shows that often feel interchangeable, Married to Real Estate stood out as one of HGTV's most positive, family-centered series. But as the show grew, something behind the scenes began shifting. By season 4, Egypt and Mike later admitted that the energy felt completely different. The production team had changed so drastically that not a single person from the earlier seasons remained. And with new people came new problems. Filming delays became constant. Communication broke down. Clients weren't being updated, and Egypt and Mike felt forced to step in personally to protect their reputation. In some cases, they even spent their own money just to ensure renovations stayed on track. All this threatened the very trust their brand was built on. Even more frustrating, they began to feel ignored. Despite being executive producers, they described moments where they felt mowed over, as if their own show had started operating without them at the center of it. Then came the controversy that pushed everything into public view. In April 2025, a New York Times article suggested the show was more performance than reality, painting Egypt and Mike as people who breezed in for cameras, while real workers did the heavy lifting. Egypt didn't let it slide. She responded online with raw frustration, saying she was tired of constantly having to prove herself, overworked, overlooked, and used as a scapegoat. But the deeper issue wasn't just the criticism. It was that the article used only Egypt's photo, leaving Mike out completely, despite him being interviewed alongside her. To Egypt, it felt like erasure. And then, just months later, the biggest shock hit. While on vacation, they received the news that HGTV had decided not to renew Married to Real Estate. It felt abrupt, especially with loyal viewers and strong momentum. HGTV later called it a show that had run its course, but Egypt and Mike's version hinted at something else entirely, a slow breakdown behind the scenes that finally reached its breaking point. Egypt and Mike were especially heartbroken because the network didn't even give their show the farewell it deserved. And then came the twist that made the situation look even more absurd. Just weeks after the cancellation, Married to Real Estate received a Daytime Emmy nomination. Fans immediately called it proof that HGTV miscalculated the show's fan base. How does a show get cut and then honored for excellence right after? Egypt and Mike took the moment and reframed it as validation. If the network wanted to close the door, the industry had just reminded everyone that the work still mattered. But life didn't pause for celebration. Soon after, Egypt revealed another loss. Her father had passed away. And what made the grief heavier was the truth she admitted publicly. She hadn't seen him in 15 years. There had been distance, silence, and unfinished conversations that never got resolved. Her grief wasn't only about death, it was about regret, and the pain of knowing closure was no longer possible. And that's when Egypt decided to speak out with no filter. She talked about being overworked and underpaid by HGTV, and not just financially. Underpaid in respect, support, and recognition. In lifestyle television, talent often becomes the product, but not always the priority. Networks profit off personalities, but when things shift, even the faces that built the brand can suddenly feel disposable. At the same time, HGTV was going through a wider shakeup. Rising production costs and shifting strategy pushed the network toward cheaper formats and new programming priorities. Egypt and Mike weren't the only ones affected. Several shows were quietly cut as HGTV recalibrated its lineup. But Egypt wasn't left powerless. In one of the smartest moves of her career, she revealed she owns the trademark to Married to Real Estate. And that changes everything. Because even if HGTV canceled the show, Egypt and Mike still own the name, which means that the brand can live on through streaming, independent production, or even a YouTube-style reboot. What is Egypt Sherrod doing now? If anyone expected Egypt Sherrod to disappear after Married to Real Estate ended, they clearly haven't been paying attention, because Egypt has never been the type to sit around waiting for the next opportunity. She believes in creating her own destiny. Instead of treating the cancellation like a career setback, she's been moving like someone who already had a bigger plan in motion. One of her most meaningful projects has been the launch of 1,000 Women Owned, a nonprofit initiative she co-founded with Mike Jackson. The mission is ambitious but extremely personal, helping support and elevate 1,000 women-owned businesses by the year 2030. For Egypt, the project is about building real economic power and giving women access to resources, networks, and confidence that many never had. At the same time, she's still deeply rooted in what made her successful long before HGTV. Her Atlanta-based business, Indigo Road Realty, continues to grow, along with Indigo Road Design Group and her expanding home brand. In many ways, losing a TV schedule may have given her something she rarely had before: time to focus fully on building her company without the pressure of production deadlines. And she's also stepping into a more educational lane. Through her partnership with TurboTax Business and QuickBooks, Egypt and Mike have been sharing practical advice for entrepreneurs. Not the flashy motivational talk, but real guidance on taxes, organization, and how to run multiple ventures without burning out. It's a natural extension of their brand, teaching people how to build wealth not just homes. More than anything, Egypt has been showing that her career was never dependent on HGTV. The show may have introduced her to new audiences, but the business, the mission, and the momentum were already there. Egypt Sherrod has had quite the journey, but it still feels like she's just getting started. What do you think of all the challenges she has faced along the way? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.